Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Chris and Andre Show.
This is something that's been kind of, brewing in my head. I've heard like probably 4 times in the past week from different people, we should move beyond race in conversations. But I've also noticed that a lot of the people I've talked to, even like in the last couple weeks, I've noticed that there's a lot of people talking points, right? Which led me to kind of just pay attention more to different things I've been listening to. And I've noticed that critical thinking, something we talked about well before it became one of the latest buzzwords, and open, honest dialogue or real conversations, they've become buzzwords. Now I don't want to even say those because I'm like, I don't want to be part of the problem. But it just makes me wonder, what's going on? Like, why are people like the race thing? And the big thing for me is like the race thing. I believe as a society, especially as a country, we can stop talking about race when we start acknowledging the issues that different groups are going through. And we're not willing to do that. That is first and foremost. And the talking points, I think that people are just becoming... I think the influence of social media of trying to convince people to... I think social media is a tool that you convince people to like something. Mm-hmm. That has become part of people's methodology in having conversations. So, talking points are so broad and they get recirculated so quickly that's becoming a part of our culture. Well, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, I understand to some degree the desire to boil things down to specific talking points, right? Especially from, say, a party standpoint. If you're the Democratic Party and you say, okay, these are the 5 things that we want to focus on.
Okay.
Right? But
I'm shaking my head because I'm trying to not, my issue, the reason I'm shaking my head is because I don't think it's just in politics anymore. I think everything is a talking point.
No, that's fair. I think politics is where we're used to seeing that, right? And that's probably the area where it's more obvious in a sense when you hear those talking points. But I don't think that it's what it isn't is what I think it's historically been, where it's like, well, there's a kind of a clear line, right? You have the left or the Democratic side or the Democrat side that has their talking points. You have the right and the GOP that has their talking points. It seems like there's a lot of mixing of those talking points now, where you're hearing things from both sides, but it's not. To me, it seems like it's more in this. It's not even like a desire to be disingenuous, but like a desire. I don't know. It almost feels like there's
to be liked.
Yeah, I guess to some degree, but it's not even like to be liked. In my mind, it's this. It's almost like we feel, and I say we, but some people feel bad for people who have crazy ideas, and so they're like, well, maybe that idea is not so crazy, right? And I don't know, man.
So,
people did that with the Nazis, and I know that that's a common parallel that we draw, and I'm not saying that.
Well, I'll be honest. The Nazis were not a disruptive party at first.
Right.
Historically, that is a fact.
Yeah.
Right. It's just that history played out to where they became a disruptive and disgusting.
And it was also a build-up, right? It wasn't like day one Hitler showed up and was like, vote for me, we're going to kill all the Jewish people. No.
Right.
It was, hey, we're going to make Germany great again. Where have I heard that? And then it became, well, how do we make Germany great again? Well, there's all these people over here that I don't like who are stealing all the stuff that you want. And it became that that infighting, really, where it was all about turning two groups of people against them, and that's exactly. I'm not saying that we're on the verge of becoming Nazi Germany. I'm just saying that the environment, the climate that we find ourselves in right now is eerily similar to the fact that we have these two groups who don't see eye to eye on this stuff and have gotten to a point where it's like they don't even want to talk to each other. They don't want to be in the same room with each other. And to some degree, I could almost say, like, you know, the individual voters down at the end, okay, you know, some of you, yeah, like, you're going to put your head in the sand, stick your fingers in your ear, and that's it. But the politicians, I think, is what, and not that it should, but it is, like, so incredibly disappointing that even they, like, they've bought into it now to the extent where they're like, oh, shit, I don't even have to pretend to like these people. Like, and they're all friends at the end of the day, right? Like, I bet you Chuck Schumer and freaking
Mitch McConnell
probably go have dinner more often than anybody. Like, you know, and secret buddy phone calls late at night. Like, I don't know, but it's all just a scam. Like, I think that's the thing that I.
But don't you think that
I'm focused
that
on
is
the
kind
political
of
side of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that. I think just that line of or that way of thinking is probably something I'm kind of pushing back against. It's like, okay, maybe that's true.
Yeah.
But can't we acknowledge the problem, right? It's like subconsciously people are resigning to whatever narrative is that's, you know, floating around. Just like you, well, it's all a scam, right? That terminology is like, well, okay, maybe it is. But what's the problem? And people can't define the problem to me. So mentally, I'm like, no, I want to know what the problem is. Maybe it is a scam. I'm not saying it is or isn't. I'm just saying, like, so how do you fix that, right?
Well, I think the other thing to remember is that the problem is not the people who are in there, right? Like, those people are ultimately, in my mind, they are a result of the environment that's been created.
Fair.
Right?
Right.
Like
that's super fair.
It attracts people like that to that because it gives them the opportunity for influence and, I mean, to some degree, like the legitimacy to be untrue, right? Like,
so here's a better way. Like, take your same like thought process and apply it to Joe Rogan. Is he right or wrong?
In which way?
I'm sorry, not right or wrong. Should he be quote unquote canceled? Right?
No, I don't. I mean, no, I don't. Like, again, well, how are we defining canceled? Right, is one thing.
Or
like,
whatever that definition is.
Yeah,
right? Because
like, do I think that
hearing
Spotify should take all of Joe Rogan's podcasts off of their platform? Probably not. No.
Or can't we just say, like, yeah, maybe he's, you know, I've heard people defend him and say he's not racist. They know him. They're black. I'm like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
I don't listen to his show regularly. I'm not trying to defend or, like, attack him.
Right.
But the parallel is, like, but are the consequences fair for his actions?
Sure.
Then you take that up another notch, and it's like, well, what about Whoopi Goldberg?
Yeah.
Like, that wasn't... I don't agree with ABC's reaction to that, but is it very dissimilar to the Joe Rogan, like, you know, situation? The answer could be yes or no. Then you can say, well, but ABC fired Roseanne. So then you, like, if you're not careful, if you're not willing to, like, pull the thread the whole way through, you immediately go to it's all a scam, or you pull up the latest and greatest talking point. And I think that inherently is dangerous.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I know this isn't like the focus of our conversation, and this is not to get us off on a tangent, but I want to address the Joe Rogan thing really quickly.
Okay.
Specifically on the race issue, right? Because I look at it from what I've understood, right? I've listened to a few episodes of the Joe Rogan podcast when he's had guests on that I found interesting, right? And that's pretty much it. This whole thing with him using the N-word and his explanation as to kind of why he felt like it was, you know, why he made the decision. I won't even say like he felt like it was okay, but why he made the decision to use the word. He even addressed, like, instead of just saying the N-word, I would just say the word. And I felt like as long as it was, you know, within that context, like, there's no real issue with it. And I kind of sit there and I'm like, yeah, but you knew when you were doing it that there were some people out there who were going to be like, oh, shit, like, he just said the N-word. Like, you know, and even though you weren't, like, calling somebody it or anything like that, that there was the potential for this to happen down the road, where somebody takes, you know, 5 years of podcast episodes and goes, wow, this guy said the N-word a lot. and it doesn't really matter what the context is, right? Like, I'm just saying from Joe Rogan's standpoint, first off, I guess as a fellow white person, like, no, man, there's never a time where that word's okay. I guess, like, that's where I'm at, personally. But
I personally, I mean, I don't have a dog in that fight, like, I don't have a hard on for Joe Rogan,
right.
basically.
I mean, and I don't either. I'm just saying, like, if I said it, right? I mean, you wouldn't
don't get
exactly. You wouldn't be like, oh, that's just Chris. You'd be like, listen,
like,
dude,
my dude,
what are you doing, right? Exactly, and that's where, again, I feel like somebody needed to say that to Joe Rogan. Like, hey, man, what was your thought process here, right? And he'd be like, oh, this, and be like, I get that. That's probably the only time you should say that.
But dude, but here's my thing with him. He's had Snoop on his joint. He's had Dave Chappelle on his joint.
Yeah.
He's had a lot of people, and I'm sure they probably at some point heard him say it. I don't know if he thought that was. I don't know if that was sign off or people saying like, "Yo, my dude." But that's where I'm just kind of like, yo, I know he's had a lot of people that that don't look like him on his show that probably heard it, that probably somebody as big as their team is, they probably said, your dude said this, right? But he did it like multiple times. That's neither here or there. I just think to a point where it's like I'm not married to the word, but I'm not divorcing the word.
Yeah.
Basically, I use the word. I don't, and that's me putting pepper on my food. I don't care. Yeah. And I know there's people in my
I do
community
the same
that say,
thing. No, just kidding.
You should not.
Obviously.
I swear to God, it's not okay. So there are people in my community. There's a big push where there's a lot of black people that are saying like, yo, we shouldn't use that word at all. I'm like, nigga, please. I'm not even trying to hear you on that shit. I'm going to use that word because it's a form of expression for me. I'm not asking you to agree with it. I've met people that are black that have actually pushed back, and I'm like, yo, and I respect what you're saying, but how I'm expressing myself, it's not harming anybody. You just don't like my choice of words, and that's fair. But it's a word I'm probably going to use when I'm expressing myself in this manner, and let's move on. It's not a big deal. You can't negate my points because I said a real word.
Yeah,
it's okay. Now, I'm not giving Joe Rogan a pass.
No.
Nor am I indicting like the people that have been on his podcast that could have or would have, should have, or whatever, should have addressed it with him. I don't care, but I do think that it's a matter of, was he contrite in his apology? He seemed like he was legit.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to like bash him.
No, and like that's the other thing is that I think like at the end of the day, I don't think that Joe Rogan is like a bad person, right? Like I don't think that he's out here intentionally trying to spread misinformation. I don't think.
But I disagree with that though.
Okay.
I disagree with I think that, and it goes back to my original point. If we can't take critical thinking and honest open dialogue and turn it in real conversations and turn them into buzzwords.
Sure.
Because if you do that, you will not actually have any accountability as a person, or you will not feel the responsibility to say, hey, I don't agree with that and this is why, to the person you're having that conversation with.
So I totally agree. I guess with the Rogan stuff, I think, and we talked about this a little bit last week with Chris and Matt, that like some of the guests that he has on there, he's not the person to sit there and push back on some of that stuff, right? Like I don't think as well versed in these things as he might be, right? Like pushing back on Jordan Peterson's climate change, comments.
First of all, Jordan Peterson is he's a weapon waiting to explode.
He is, I know, and I get that too, right? Like even from Joe Rogan's perspective, I get like you're sitting there like, oh man, I get this guy on my podcast, like we're gonna get a whole bunch of eyeballs, right? Like he's a businessman at the end of the day. I get that, like that's his job is to make money, to make his podcast popular, to do things that he thinks are going to draw more attention and more eyeballs. Sometimes that's being controversial. Sometimes that's bringing people on who are going to say stuff that he may not ultimately agree with, but he's also not going to sit there and disagree with them. And that's where I feel like there's more of a personal responsibility on Joe Rogan that if you're going to bring these people on your podcast, either you need to have another person on there that can have that conversation with them and provide the counterpoints, or you yourself need to have your team prepare you so that you can have and engage in those conversations.
Or just be adult enough to say, hey, I don't understand what you're saying.
Sure.
There have been many times you were there when I literally told the CEO of a company, I don't agree with what you're saying. I didn't know that particular industry that we were working in. I was new to it.
Yeah.
But I was very comfortable with saying, I don't believe that's right, based on my experience and based on my skill set.
And I'm probably being a little nice to Joe Rogan right now.
You shouldn't be.
No, I'm not saying that I should be. I don't know. I'm with you. Like, I watched the apology video just because I was kind of curious. And I do think that, like, there's an element, like, I do believe that he's like, hey, I messed up, you know? Like, and yeah, I messed up a lot. But
the funniest thing he said was, if you have to say that you're not racist,
then you've already messed up. Yeah, that was great. I mean, at least, like, and that's part of it, I think, right? Is like he recognizes that. And
right.
But I am still, like, frustrated at times because I'm like, dude, you're providing a platform to millions of listeners for the people that you bring on your show, and sometimes that's awesome, right? Like, he had the dude that infiltrated, not even like infiltrated, but that made friends with like multiple KKK members on the show. That was one of the episodes that I watched, and it was so interesting just to hear that guy talk. It wasn't about Joe Rogan. I didn't give a shit what Joe Rogan had to say. I wanted to listen to what that guy had to say.
But Chris, that's my point from last week. Like, we can't sit here and like we put people as a society on a pedestal.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. We should not just give up our responsibility to have an opinion about what they're doing and what they're not doing.
Sure.
And that's my point. And it's like, look, I don't disagree with you, but it's also to this in that same vein. It's like, but why wouldn't you ask the question? Like, we all have either you're just that.
Yeah. And that's where I think there is an element of disingenuousness, right? Like, I do think that he is more willing to let people come on and say whatever they want without pushing back, even on things where he may not agree with it or flat out knows that what the person is saying.
That's on him.
Yes, and I agree. Like, those are the things that he absolutely deserves criticism for. Like, I don't know, maybe argue that deserves more criticism than whether or not he said the N-words a few times, but...
Sure, I agree. Like, I think the principles and the values that people try to put on public display, and it's, you know, I could look at Joe Rogan and say the same thing about Mr. Kanye West, right? Again, he's in the news again for some crazy banana stuff.
Hey,
you know,
really
how he's
to get Chris back on the podcast, aren't you?
Man, but
I know, I'm just kidding. I know.
My point is genuine. Like, the way he's handling his divorce.
Yeah.
As a person that's been through that, I'm like, yo, he's foul.
Yeah.
Like, everything you're doing is foul.
Yes. I mean, like, granted, Kanye is probably not the best person mentally equipped to go through something as mentally destructive as a divorce can be, right?
And humbling as a divorce.
Exactly.
Right?
And it would be great, to some degree, to see Kanye come out on the other side of this and be like, man, I learned a lot. You know? Like, shit I was doing in my life wasn't right, and... it wasn't a great experience, but I'm a better person because of it now, and I've moved on, and I'm, you know, whatever. But I don't expect any of that to happen from Kanye. Like,
but my critique holds true, right? It's like we should be able to, if we're going to have these honest and real conversations, we should be able to say unapologetically, this is wrong.
Yes.
And I think our society has gotten to this really us versus them mentality way too deep.
Well, we've opinionated right and wrong, right? We've made right and wrong a subjective measurement as opposed to an objective measurement, right? Well, do you feel that it was right? Did you mean to hurt that person? Well, if you didn't mean it, and I mean, right? These are the conversations I have with my 8-year-old, where it's like, you know, but I didn't mean to do that, and I'm like, but it still happened, right? And, like, ultimately somebody's responsible for that happening. And because you were the person who was standing there when the glass fell over and you were the one who touched the glass, it's your job to clean it up. Like, I'm not mad. I'm just saying, like, you're the one who's got to clean that stuff up. So
So India Irie, it kind of connects to Joe Rogan. Her points in doing a compilation of Joe Rogan dropping the N-bomb and stuff like that. Her points were different from Neil Young, right?
I mean, so because Neil Young and the other Joni Mitchell and those artists, it was exclusively around the COVID-19 misinformation stuff, right? Yeah.
I think that what we're not being careful of it as a society, especially as a country, is the burning topics that we have. They need acknowledgement, like true and genuine acknowledgement.
I acknowledge that.
I love that. That was great. But we're passing this on, and we're cramming like honesty and truth into buzzwords. That is like, it's become our default so quickly, and it's so lazy. It's like the most lazy thing you can do to try to solve a problem. These are the things that we struggle with are problems, but we're like, yeah, but I'm going to have an honest conversation. I'm going to be real with this person. No, you're not. You're not going to tell them what they're doing hurts you. Or, for example, there's another person in Minnesota that was killed, right, by a police officer, no-knock warrant. But we're not changing the laws.
Right.
We're literally we're not doing anything to change the laws. We're just...
Which essentially it says that, from a government standpoint, we value police officers' lives more than innocent civilians.
But do we? Because we just let January 6th happen, and we're not prosecuting these people that stormed our Capitol.
Okay, so I mean, see, this is I go back and forth on this with the whole January 6th thing because, like, what they've prosecuted 450 or charged 450 individuals, right?
They're still looking for 357, I think.
Yeah, so they're still tracking those down. The whole the people in the government who may very likely have been involved in it. I think it's a more difficult case to build because they don't have the video evidence of these people storming into the Capitol, right? And so to some degree, I am willing to say there must be something going on behind the scenes. Now that only gives you so much time, right?
Sure.
We're seeing right now, to some degree, the results of what happens when you don't move more quickly. But I also don't want this country to move to the point where it's we had a dude who got elected essentially because he chanted "lock her up." And now a lot of us on the other side are sitting here, lock him up, right?
Do you really believe he got elected because of that?
No, but I'm the irony, I guess, that the guy that we're now that we're saying belongs in jail was the one who was just kind of throwing around we'll throw this person in jail, throw that person in jail, throw this person in jail. We don't really need proof. We just know that they did it, right? And to some extent, I feel like that's where this that is the desire from certain people within that certain crowd, where it's we know he did it. It doesn't matter if you can find evidence. Just put the man in jail. He's too dangerous to be out here by himself. I'm not disagreeing that the man isn't dangerous, but at the same time, I don't think that you can just completely circumvent the the justice system in order to put this one person. And I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. That's part of what I'm struggling with right now.
I don't disagree with that, but I think the issue is that we as this, literally, it goes back to what I'm saying. We don't acknowledge the problem. What is the actual problem? We literally just we dance around the problem so frequently and so smoothly that we make T-shirts, we get a hashtag, we do all these things aside from addressing the actual problem. Breonna Taylor, for example, no-knock warrant, died, right?
Yep.
And even forget the federal level, we can't even decide in our own communities that we don't want to be a part of that problem. We don't acknowledge the problem. I don't know how we get beyond race when we can't acknowledge the problem. I don't know how we get beyond, I don't know how we get beyond a lot of things that we just don't acknowledge. We can't just, you know how humbling it is for me to say, I don't know, right? Or I never looked at it that way. And there's been many, I have spent most of my life trying to understand other people before myself. And then once I understand them, I can actually say, no, but Chris, I understand why that feels that way. here's my experience. I spend more of my time trying to understand the other person and acknowledging what they're saying. I may not agree 100%. I still listen to NPR. Not because I ever intentionally wanted to,
right,
but because I didn't understand what people were saying to me. But you see my point?
Yeah. No, I do. Like there was part of me that for a while there was doing the same thing with certain other news channels. Where it was kind of like, I feel like I need to at least see the headlines that the craziness is inspiring, right?
I can't do that.
No, and it is. It's really frustrating. I don't know, man. I hear what you're saying. Like, I think it has become so incredibly difficult to have honest conversations. I don't know why that is. I don't know where the breakoff point started. Where did we divert from this? But at the same time, like I remember growing up where it was like, oh, you don't talk about politics or religion at the,
But why not?
Right, exactly. Because you're going to upset somebody, because somebody is not going to feel the same way about it that you do. And it's like, well, what's wrong with that? Why do we all have to agree on the same things in order to be friendly with each other? Like,
well, it's not even about being friendly. And I know I've talked about like meeting an actual lobbyist at a Christmas party. Mm-hmm. And it was hard to kind of like, he assumed because I'm black, I was a Democrat and I was a registered Republican. Doesn't mean that, never meant I voted straight ticket across anything. Just meant that, no, I don't agree with that. Case in point, for context, social programs, i.e. more lazily focused welfare. I know people that sell food stamps. I know people that are like legit, like just gaming the system. I think that part is terrible, and we should eliminate that. But I also believe that we should help people that are like, going through a tough time. But I also was willing to listen to what he said. He had already he already knew that I should be voting for, at the time, as Barack Obama. I was like, no, I don't really, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't
I should
think
have been
that
voting for at the time. That's nice.
Yeah, I'm like, no, I do not. I don't think and this is why. But he shut me off, and I'm like, all right, well, let me understand what you're saying. And as I understood what he was saying, he was telling me how his family was like a third generation, blah, 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 in the DNC and the state party and blah, blah, blah. He's now a lobbyist. And I'm like, so that's interesting. So what lobby is it? And he told me, I'm like, well, that's kind of random. I'm like, can you tell me more about why that's actually a legit lobby? Then he told me more of the details. I'm like, oh, now I understand.
Yeah.
But I was willing to like have that conversation to understand him, and then I shared my point of view. It wasn't the other way around. Like, somebody's got to be the adult in the conversation. Like, and it can't be that I think the issue that we're dancing around as a society, especially as a country, is that we automatically assume that the other person's wrong.
Sure. I do.
I think that's. Well, you gave me. I got a 2 for this episode. Like, I'm literally like living my best life. It was not about winning at the time. It was about the long game.
I see that now.
And that's. And I think. I knew I was right then. I'm like, I'm right. He'll come
but
around.
I mean, like, look.
But that's a good example, though. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just as guilty. Like, I will, driving down the road, if I see a Trump sticker on the back of a car, I am assuming some pretty awful things about that person, right?
Right.
Granted, it's 2022. If you do still have a Trump sticker on the back of your car, I might not be that wrong. But it isn't fair. Like, it's not fair to sit there and assume, like, just like it wouldn't be any more fair to say somebody with a Biden-Harris, bumper sticker and assume something on that. It's, I don't know. It's.
I think the course correction we did, or we're trying to do, is an over course correction.
Okay.
We're oversteering, like, big time.
Which way? I'm just kind of like, because I felt like
to the opposite of whatever's being presented to us. It's a complete oversteer. Like, it has nothing to do with. it's not a part, like most of the issues that people talk about that bring up the talking points, they're not partisan.
Right.
They're just not. It's like, I want good schools. Yeah, okay.
We all do.
But CRT, what are you talking about?
Well, there's a school district in California that was thinking about teaching it, so the entire country needs to shut it down before it breaks out. Right. Now, that wasn't the case with coronavirus, but...
But you see, but the contradictions and the oversteer is like, it's insane.
Yeah.
Like, you want good schools, I want good schools also. But what's the problem? CRT. But from my understanding, it's being taught in grad school level, and it's being taught in law school.
If you legitimately tried to teach the actual course curriculum of CRT to elementary, middle, or high school students, they wouldn't understand what the hell you're talking about. But what happened is that CRT became equated with anything dealing with America's racist past. So anytime that we talked about slaves or white people owning slaves or...
people felt bad.
Yeah, exactly.
As they should.
Yeah, people felt bad. And so that made them uncomfortable. And they said, I don't want to feel bad and uncomfortable in school. You can't make me do that. It's not even them.
It's not,
you can't make my kids think bad and uncomfortable things about their ancestors.
Here's the reality. Like, the fact that people feel bad is actually a good thing.
Yes.
Right?
But they don't see
because
it that way.
It shows a level of compassion.
Yes, a level of empathy.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which is something that we touched on, that you have to have in order to have these real conversations with people. Like,
yeah.
But that's what, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that it's just like magically our empathy went away, but I don't know. Like,
one would argue.
Maybe.
Right? One would argue because, like, the again, back to the original points. Let's move beyond race.
Yeah.
Okay. But let's acknowledge the issue that the other person's bringing to us. Can we do that? I don't like how that feels.
It's hard to do that when we're not acknowledging the reason for that problem, which is race.
No, it's not even about race. It's about what they experience, right? Let's acknowledge their pain points. This is what you learn. For anybody out there that's getting an MBA or you're trying to learn business, one of the biggest, like, secret sauces is understanding, like, the problem. You have to understand the problem.
So I have to illustrate this point, I have to tell a story from our E-Area days. When Andre and I first started working on the same team together for the second time, one of the things that Andre talked about was this, right? We need to identify where things are breaking in our system. Where are our pain points? What are causing the most problems here so that we can make those areas more efficient to make the whole team more efficient? And so we would literally sit down for like 2 hours every week with the entire team and just map out our processes. Talk about how we currently did things, what the ideal way to do them was, where we were experiencing the most bottlenecks or pain points, and how we could possibly alleviate them. And then we mapped all of that stuff and provided it to management so that they then understood what all of our processes were and why certain things took as long as they did. And magically, we started becoming a much more efficient and well-working team. Once every individual understood what everybody else's responsibility was within the process, right? And what their own specific responsibilities were, so they weren't doing somebody else's job.
It's pretty simple.
It is. And I don't even have an MBA.
Neither do I.
I went to work with a couple hard knocks.
My dude, you did not.
It's knock life for us.
I just, like, I'm not trying to minimize the issues that people have, but I'm just trying to understand it. And I don't conceptually, I do not disagree with the problem. What I disagree with fundamentally is the fact that you have two opposing parties for what they're choosing to oppose each other.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, I'm having a hard time understanding what you're saying. Like, that is super complicated to do because you have to put your pride in your back pocket.
You have to admit that you don't know everything walking into the conversation.
Yeah.
Right?
Doesn't mean you're not intelligent. It just means that however the other person's articulating the issue isn't making sense to you.
Yeah.
And I think that is I think politicians, example, I think, celebrities right now, example, because I've heard like rumors that Whoopi Goldberg is like not okay with the fact she got suspended for 2 weeks. And this is how we start the avalanche effect of just chaos. Mm-hmm. Because we choose, the problem starts like this. Something hurt, something broke, something didn't make sense. It's typically never, like, I can't think of any problem, even like interpersonal problems that you deal with, they never not involve another person.
Right.
So it's never a singular, like, person's responsibility of the problem or the issue. So I struggle with understanding, like, well, why don't they just ask the question?
People are afraid.
Or why don't they?
I mean, I can speak from experience that, like, there are times where asking that question, like you said, I mean, it's putting yourself out there. It's making yourself very vulnerable. And maybe it shouldn't be that way. I don't know that you should necessarily feel that way, but something inside me has done that for a long time, where I'm afraid sometimes to ask the questions, whether I'm afraid of what the answer is going to be. Like I don't know, or I'm worried that the answer is going to be something that I don't want to hear. And so it's better. I'm like, well, if that might be the answer, maybe I'm just better off not knowing. But it's not. Like, I mean, in the end, like, it doesn't do you any better to ignore the problem or to try and pretend like it doesn't exist, or to just stick your head in the sand and say, like, well, it's a problem, but it's this other person's problem. They're the ones who are struggling with this. Like, I do that sometimes too, where, I look at a situation, I'm like, I don't know what else I could be doing better. And then I sit down and I talk with the person on the other side of it, and they're like, no, these are the 3 things that you could be doing better that would make it really, like, significantly better for me. And I go, well, fuck.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, I'm not trying to minimize it, but I'm noticing a lot that, and it's across how we consume media, how we consume entertainment, how we consume the news, how we consume information in general, where it's super quick to pick a side.
Well,
and I just think that's important. You have to have you're going to have your bias,
yeah.
Right? You have to have an opinion, but it shouldn't be the resolution, right? My opinion is never my resolution.
I think I have a good story to share that kind of helps to illustrate some of these points. So there's a subreddit called Choosing Beggars. There's also another one called Begging Choosers. And it's basically people who are asking for something but are being, at either a ridiculously low cost or for no money whatsoever, but are also being like, but it needs to be super, like, people who are like, oh, I need a nanny to watch my 5 kids 7 days a week, 40 hours or, 24 hours a day, and but I can only pay you $75 a day. Or something like that. Like, okay.
God bless you.
Right, exactly. So I was on Twitter one morning, and I saw some tweet about, like, a indie game developer who was like, hey, anybody out there want to make free music, right? I'm thinking, like, 3 or 4 songs and some sound effects. And as somebody who makes music, I kind of looked at it and was like, oh, only 3 or 4 songs? That's all you need, right? Oh, you just want free sound effects? Yeah, let me whip those up for you real quick. And so, like, I screenshotted it, and I put it up on Choosing Beggars. And I got a bunch of replies that were kind of like, oh, wow, like, that's pretty ballsy. Or, same thing, like, oh, only 3 or 4 songs? I had made the comment that, like, you can download royalty-free music. You can get free sound effects, which I do all the time for our podcast. Like, that stuff's out there if you really just want to take the time to look for it. But this one dude would not get off the freaking thread. Like, every single time that I made a point, he was coming back and just like, no. And, like, it started getting into one of those things where it was like, I felt like I had to win this argument, right? Like, I had started it, and I'm like, this guy's just being a dick. Like, no matter what I say, he's just like, nah. Then we went back and forth a bunch, right? And I started being kind of a troll. And he did too. Like, we both started just kind of trolling each other.
That's why I don't mess with Twitter anymore, because it...
Oh, this was on Reddit. This was on Reddit.
So it gets even worse on Reddit.
And so then the next day, right, I'm looking at it and I'm rereading it and I'm reading through some of the comments and I'm like, you know what? Maybe this guy was actually right. Maybe this doesn't really belong here. Maybe I was being a little harsh. And maybe my responses to him were more in my trying to defend my original position as opposed to actually like taking in any of this new information and considering that I might have been wrong in the first place. And so I found one of his comments and I said, hey man, you know what? I thought about it and you're right. Like, I probably was being a little bit critical. It does seem like he's just an indie developer. He's putting the game out for free. I probably shouldn't have posted this here. And I'm sorry that, you know, we kind of got into it going back and forth. And he came back and he was like, hey, that's cool. You know, it's all good. Like, it happens. I think I said something like, yesterday was a really shitty day, and I think I was just taking it out on the internet. And he was like, hey, man, happens to all of us. You know, hope you have a good day. Then, like, 6 hours later that night, I get a notification that's like, so-and-so replied to a comment. I'm like, oh, he replied to another comment. And I look, and it's like, it's one of my earlier comments, but it's him being a fucking asshole again. And I'm like, what the fuck, man? We totally cleared this up. I thought we were cool. And so I was just like, what are you doing? And he was like, just saying. And then, like, I found another one. And I'm like, dude, what the fuck? I thought we were cool. And he was like, finally, he's like, oh, shit, I'm sorry. Like, Reddit gave me a notification that these two comments were new. I thought you had come back and started talking shit again. I didn't even look at the timestamp on the comments. Like, that's my bad. And then, like, in all bold is like, hey, everybody, please disregard all my asshole comments above. And so I was just like, haha, it's all good. Like, you know, I'm glad that we were able to clear that up because it was really confusing. And then I think my bold message was like, look, everybody, you can disagree and still be friends on the internet. Like, but that's what it takes, right? Like, at the end of the day, both of us were interacting with each other. And I don't know if it's social media that's necessarily pushed it this way, but I think there is an element of every interaction feels like it's a zero-sum game, right? If I don't win this interaction, then you're getting something out of me that I wasn't prepared to give up. And so I need to be ready at all times to argue and shoot down and to win every interaction and conversation that I have. And it's just the worst possible way to approach personal interactions.
Yeah, the ledge is there. The ledge is always there, right? And I think that, you know, one thing that I try to remember in my own interaction with people. Hey, what are my principles? What are my values? Like, when you watch our previous episode with my kids on it,
our kids,
you'll notice that I don't I don't have to agree with what they're saying, but I pause to understand them.
Except for when you interrupt them and say, no, that's not true.
Yeah, because sometimes
I was just laughing because there was a moment in not the last episode, but the one before when I was at area this week, and Chris was saying something. He was just like, no, but that's not true. Like, you just straight up cut him off, and we're like, no, false, truth drop, no. Like, it was hilarious. I loved. By the way, like, it was great having your kids on, and that was one of the things that I really appreciate. My mom was laughing. Because, you know, you and I were talking on the phone when I was here at the office the other day, and she was listening in the background. And we were talking about your kids being on and some of that stuff. And she was just like, so Andre didn't know what his kids were going to say when they came on the podcast? And I was like, I mean, I don't think he, like, coached them or anything. But I think, you know, yeah, there were some things where he was just like, no, like, what? What are you saying? You know? But I was like, you know, but the cool thing is that it wasn't like, all right, you know, podcast over, you know, or like you're saying, like, go to your room. It was like, all right, look, yeah, we had all that conversation with Chris in the first one, and it was so good that we invited him back to come back the second time, right? And I think the conversation in our second episode was even better than the one we had in the first one. So,
and it's not a matter of like one-upmanship is not it's not my intent, right? It's never my intent. I can always so let me just like bring this all together. My wife still tells me I speak slowly.
But do you carry it? Oh, no, that speaks softly. Carry a big stick.
Yeah. She's like, why don't you like hurry up and... I'm like, because I'm thinking, right? Because sometimes I'll hear something that somebody says and I'm not trying to formulate an answer because, it's not fair. And I have to kind of like weigh what I'm thinking. And there are times when my brain's like, yeah, but they didn't say it like that. I'm like, okay, so let me try to make sure. So it's being intentional about trying to understand people. And that's private and publicly.
Yeah.
We as a society have lost that ability. And we're not lost it. We suppressed it.
We became disinterested with it to some degree, right? Like, I think, there seems to be this feeling of other people are not as important as me. Like, what's going on in my life is ultimately the most important thing. And again, like, I don't know that social media necessarily created that, but I think it certainly led to it.
It's exasperated.
Yeah, exactly. Like a speeding up of that impact or that belief. And again, I say this not as somebody that's like, I'm immune to all of this. Like, these are things that I've experienced myself, in my own social media interactions and stuff like that, to the point where I pulled way back. And, we talked about it before on the podcast, where I cleaned out my Facebook feed. I went through my Instagram feed, like Twitter. All of those got trimmed way back to a couple of people, more or less. Like,
right.
And it's mostly just because I got really tired of all the other noise. And it was harder to spot the noise with more stuff in my feed.
And the way we manage our Twitter account is, like, for anybody out there, we both have access to it. We both don't always chime in.
Yeah. I will totally pretend to be Andre sometimes on there. Using the N-word all over the place.
No, I swear on my right toe. Yeah, my people, that does not happen.
No.
He went for the joke. I respect him for that, but that does not happen.
I had to bring it back full circle. No, but you're absolutely right. Like, it is the whole Twitter experience is fun for me now, because I am hardly ever on my personal Twitter. I do almost all of my interactions now through our Twitter, and there's two reasons for it. One, because I want to drive more interactions and visibility for our Twitter page. But two, because I like the fact that, like, you and I both got into an argument at the same time with the same person in the same thread. Like, and it was one of these where Andre had, like, started it, and he was going back and forth with this guy, and, like, I saw that I had some notifications, so I'm like, oh, what's going on Twitter? And I was like, oh, Andre started an argument with this guy. Well, I have this to say, and chimed in. And at no point did either of us, like, sign the tweet. So there was no way this guy knew that he was arguing with two different people at the same time. But I went back and read it, and I'm like, God, it's kind of scary how good we are at just pretending to kind of be like, and not that we're the same person.
Yeah, but he got so much smoke from two different people.
Well, he did.
The same smoke.
But my favorite part was because this was an argument over, Republicans and Democrats, and why Republicans are so much better than Democrats and all this stuff. And so we had just published episode 92, which was Democrats Can't Govern Anything, period. And so the last thing that I sent to him, I was like, before you assume that we're card-carrying Democrats, please consider at least enjoying some of our podcast, and shared that one. I'm like, we try to call it like we see it on both sides when it's applicable. And his response was, good luck with the podcast. I may just do that. So again, all of the smoke back and forth, and we managed to at least somewhat end it on a potentially, like, positive note. I have no idea whether or not that guy ever came and listened to the podcast, but if you did, good on you. Andre and I weren't trying to, fuck with you or anything. It's just when I see my guy going at somebody or getting into it with somebody online, and I'm like, but I have something to share, like, I'm gonna do that. So,
and I think that all in all, and I'll sum it up with this, because I think it's important. We just have to do a better job of, like, and I've talked extensively about the fact that it's really easy to get caught up in the stream of consciousness of our society, where I've assumed that people are racist, and they're really nice to me, and I feel guilty for that's my faith going, like, why are you judging people just for some how they look, and that's what you're not really
Kanye
against.
Does on TV.
Oh, yeah, whatever. Like,
Andre's like,
and
Kanye is not in that conversation.
Yeah, I'm not trying to smoke at Kanye on that. And
I know.
I want to reiterate this, and I've talked to my kids about this. Look, if we lose the ability to call out like things for what they are because we're trying to like, you know, give people a pass, then we're fooling ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it a little bit last week with Chris and Matt, and it was kind of interesting to hear from their perspective, right? The I don't know what else to call it, so I'm just going to call it a talking point of everything's becoming too PC, right? And I don't know, like, that's part of what I was wondering when you made the comment that we're overcorrecting, right? Like over course correcting or oversteering. Do you feel like that's part of it? That it's like this push to make everything accepted and everything is part of this safe space, and so we stop losing the ability to, you know, identify things that don't really belong there? Where is it our responsibility to draw that line? Like that's part of where I'm trying to figure out.
So that's a good question. I really think that the answer to that question is the fact that you have two opposing sides that have found this middle ground PC, and they don't like the line.
Yeah.
Right. So if you go back and look at how what's his name, Andrew Carrera, he went at AOC saying if she was fat and 60, nobody would be listening to her. Where she had said like probably 2 or 3 weeks prior to that people were giving her crap because her boyfriend or fiance was wearing sandals. So she, they have these weird sexual ideas about her, and and it's like they're feeding off each other. Right?
Her fiance wearing sandals has some weird sexual thing. What the?
So
I missed out on
people
that.
People were going at her because it's been said in the political right side of the argument that people only listen to her because she's young and pretty.
Sure.
Right. And then I'm not
going to say that it hurts. Right.
Well, I'm not going to say.
I'm not saying it helps, but I'm just saying it probably doesn't hurt.
But as a person that's not traditionally like liberal, I think that's kind of.
God, I thought you were going to say traditionally not good looking, and I'm like, do I really have to sit here and tell you how good looking you are on this podcast?
It goes to my point. That's why we can't get beyond race, right?
Okay.
We turn things into stupid binaries that stop the conversation, and I think that that holds true on both sides.
Sure.
Where you can objectify somebody, or you can, turn somebody into a villain just by the words you use on what they say to you, what your response is, and I think that's super petty. Like I think
that's a really good point, right? I think we've gotten to a point where when you don't have a legitimate. Where there is no legitimate political discourse, to steal a term from the Republican National Convention.
Yeah, that's their new bag, yeah.
Jesus. Then what do, right? Like you start slandering. Somebody, I had this quote the other day, but it's like slander is the, I don't know. It's basically, it's not, slander is what you resort to when you don't have any argument left to make. So you start trying to discredit the person who's making the argument. And it's one of the things that I want to say that it was my sophomore or junior year history teacher. He was the same teacher both years, so I don't remember which year he said it, but it was like he was talking about Jimmy Carter, and because Jimmy Carter had been divorced, if I recall correctly, before he was elected president. And he was talking about how important the family was, like the nuclear family in the American society and all that. And there were a bunch of people who were like, well, what does he know? He's divorced, right? And my history teacher's point was just because the person who's sending the message may be flawed doesn't mean the message itself is flawed.
Or even better yet, does divorce and that's actually a good statement to make, because I think that even in religious conservative circles, they look at divorce as a flaw.
Yeah, as a failure.
And I would challenge that with, through my divorce, I became a better husband and father.
Right. Which is something that church and religion is supposed to help you do anyways, right? So, like, if going through your divorce helped you to be a better person, like, not that you'd choose to go through it again, like, that was fun, let's do it again. But you probably also wouldn't look back on it and say, man, like, I wish I could have just stayed the same imperfect person, and not had to go through my divorce. Like, to some degree, you look at it and you say, yeah, that sucked, but ultimately what I got out of it was so much more valuable than the pain and suffering that I had to deal with while going through it.
Yeah, I mean, Joe's always saying, like, we're giving me, big ups for, like, my relationship with my kids. Well, a lot of that is a product because I went through something that I didn't want to go through ever again. Yeah. It caused me to reevaluate my priorities. So I think it goes back to what I said before. Like, we've drawn lines, and when it comes to some, like collective social, like dialogue, which is PC, but we don't like where the line's drawn. Yeah. And both people cross the line just because it's, it's super expedient to get a point across. It goes back to what I've said before, like, Democrats have a tendency to promise hope, and Republicans operate out of a level of fear. Well, in the middle of that, you don't like where the line's drawn, and you're going to react appropriately. Okay. So my thought is basically like, look, I don't have a solve for it, but I can tell you, like, practical things that, number one, like, the biggest issue, it's never a solo problem. It's going to require that we really embrace what interpersonal skills are. And actually, it's not about reaching across the aisle or any like nonsense like that. It's just genuinely saying, hey, I don't understand what you're saying. Yeah. And I'm trying to. I just don't get it. It's not about playing both sides of the fence. It's like really trying to understand the other person. And consciously, acting out of that spirit of, I'm trying to understand you, because, like, whether it's you or somebody else, and I would tell people this even when I fired them, and it's a very honest principle, whether it's here or somewhere else, I want you to be happy. Like, I really do. Yeah. And I'm telling you these things because they don't support what you're trying to do for your family, or or the goals you have. I have fired people and told them that, hey, look, this is not a personal thing. I'm just telling you the behaviors you have are not conducive to this environment. Yeah. And I want you to be happy. And I really do care about you as a person, and I'm telling you this because I value you as a person. We're breaking up, but this is where we're at. And I want you to be able to, like, take the information and do something different for the next pass. Even when people would quit, I would call them up and say, hey, what happened? And they would tell me. And I'm like, hey, I really do appreciate it, because the things that you've told me, not everything had merit, but for the things that were, if somebody tells you something, if it's a 99% chance that it didn't happen, that 1% should make you think about it and consider it. So that's what a real leader does. So the quest I have, and just looking and listening and trying to, wrap my arms around this, they're not complicated problems, but we're exalting things that shouldn't be exalted. We're saying Joe Rogan's perhaps racist. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. It's not the point. Right. The point is, why does our society, give different outcomes to different people? Right. But in even retrospect, there was another person that made a comment that was very egregious towards black people, and they were terminated. So what's the actual problem? Right. How do we have better conversations? How do we try to understand or even predicate our conversations of, if Whoopi Goldberg's conversation was, hey, as a black woman in America in my 60s, I struggle seeing that, unless somebody told you they were Jewish, they would be discriminated against the way I've seen discrimination. Sure. Maybe that's not as, clumsy. Yeah. Right? If Joe Rogan's saying, hey, I'm not trying to get a pass on, using real word in a sentence, but this is why I feel, whether I'm quoting somebody or whether, I'm talking about an experience where people, they associate the inner city of Philadelphia and blah, blah, blah. Maybe that's a different conversation. Yeah. Not giving anybody a pass, but it actually helps to have a better conversation. Yep. So back to my point, we can't move beyond race. We can't move beyond a talking point culture until we can actually acknowledge the issues. Because the gap between the issues and our reaction is basically like picking sides and like throwing, we're not going to move beyond the pain point of race is a thing or gender's a thing or whatever. We're not going to move beyond the point of, well, I've heard these 3 to 5 talking points, and this is what I feel comfortable talking about. It doesn't encapsulate everything I'm trying to express, but I'm comfortable talking about this with you.
Yep.
And that's where we have the issue.
Yep.
And I haven't put a lot of thought into that, but
no, just like an hour's worth.
I'm just saying, like, that's kind of what I think. I just think that, like, it can't be that complicated. We should be striving and thriving to be bigger than the problem. And I think we're smarter. I think we're smart enough as a society to figure that out. And we've done it so in recent history, such as 9/11, such as, the murder of George Floyd, and the ancillary things, and, unfortunately, of Breonna Taylor. But what chips away at that is that we still have the same laws that we don't do anything about. We know we can't acknowledge those things. We can't decide that we want to get to the root of it and talk about the real things as opposed to what we're comfortable talking about. So in your mind, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this, there is the issue, right? Let's say we're going to talk about let's say move beyond race on this side of the ravine, and on this side we have the conversation. The conversation can't be a comfort zone. It's got to be basically, we have to build a bridge, and literally want to build a bridge to say, I acknowledge, and the minute you can say, I acknowledge this pain point you have, you close the gap and you can have the real conversation. The talking points keep you so far away, you'll never solve the problem. That's the bridge. Yeah. And race is like, even though it's a social construct, and I believe that, the charge against ethnicities that have more social power and social standing than other ethnic groups is so huge. You should want to, just out of a moral obligation, to kind of fix that.
Yeah. Because
we all want the same damn thing. And that's the gap. I see it. This is the issue. So race is something I brought up, but it's not the only thing that is, it's not indicative only of race. But the only thing that's a constant is the conversation. And it can't be talking points. It can't be that comfort zone. It's got to be, rolling up your sleeves and trying to get to know the other person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was a lot, man. Hopefully I got that out of my head, because I've been thinking about it. It's been, yeah. I want to talk about somebody and something I rock with.
Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to the Cosmic Wonder on YouTube. He's another one in the arsenal of things I listen to with Marvel and superhero entertainment. So thank you very much. Watched a couple of your episodes today. Very good white noise, and that's not...
it's not a racist thing.
It's not a racist thing. I'm not sure if I agree with you on the... I think... No, that was Wars 2. Wars 2 was talking about World War Hulk. I don't think that's going to happen. But anyway, the Cosmic Wonder, thank you for doing what you do. That's dope. Shout out to you. And please keep making the great videos. I enjoy them very much.
I don't have anybody to rock with this week. Not because I don't rock with anybody. I just didn't prepare. So I apologize to everybody that I do rock with out there. Actually, no, I do have one that I will shout out. So West Virginia Uncommonplace is another podcast. We are connected on Instagram, and we've been chatting back and forth a little bit. He seems to do an amazing job with his promotions and the content that they put together on the podcast. He also partnered with us to share our QR code stickers in major cities and stuff that he travels to. He's going to be sending stuff to us as well, so I wanted to make sure and give him a shout out, because it's always great when we can support each other in the podcast realm and help each other to grow. And so not that we're probably going to do much to help West Virginia Uncommonplace Podcast grow, based on their following and ours, but they do an amazing job, and so I just wanted to make sure that give them a little. I rock with this.
Okay, so that we like to make sure we give people their flowers while they're here, because that's very important. There's I went to this Stephen Covey seminar back in the day, and one of the most painful exercises is the second habit of highly effective people. Mm-hmm. Begin with the end in mind. Okay. And the exercise is you're sitting there in a room with all your coworkers and colleagues, and the instructor says, all right, so imagine you're at a funeral. The person that's there meant a lot to you, and everybody's getting up and they're giving a eulogy, part of the eulogy, and they're talking about all the good things, bad, and funny stories of this person. They get fast forward because all that gets depressing. And then the thing that made me think the most was the person's funeral you're at is you. What do people say about you on your last days? So one of my personal goals since I in my 20s is to try to make sure that, I try to live my values and principles, because I don't know if a pink elephant's going to crush my car tomorrow, but I want to make sure that I let the people I love know I love them. The people that I can help, I help them, because I want people to remember me as a person that tried to do the right thing, not because it was easy, but only because it was the right thing. So, and hopefully we can all try to, dig within ourselves and remember that we want to try to do the right thing, not because we're going to get notoriety, not because people are going to pat us in the back, but because it's merely the right thing. So get your flowers while you're here. I'm going to work my hardest every day, all day, to try to do the best I can, when I can, however I can, to lift people up and be the person I see in my mind. I'm yet to be that person, so Lord willing, I have a little bit more time to get closer to it. So that's why I think it's important to talk about and share the people we rock with. Oh, yeah. But Chris, I'm glad we got to talk this week, man. I look forward to this every week. Mm-hmm. If you're listening to us, audio version, please go to YouTube, subscribe, hit that notification button, do all the things, share it. If you want to see more stuff we do or listen to more stuff we do, you can check us out on SoundCloud. Ooh, let me pause. We are moving very slowly to Fireside FM.
Yeah, Riverside and Fireside.
Yeah.
Gets a little confusing.
We're moving very slowly to Fireside FM, where you'll be able to... We're definitely going to still distribute all of our content to all the platforms, but we're moving our content from SoundCloud to Fireside just for the analytics. SoundCloud is a great community. We really love it, and it actually helps us to build our confidence to keep doing this every week. So we are still going to make sure that people on SoundCloud can listen to all of our rants. But in the future, you can always check us out on, hopefully sooner than later, Fireside FM, SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Google Podcasts, TuneIn. And if you go to our website at chrisandandreshow.com, we have an RSS feed. If you haven't been to our new site, our updated site, please check it out at chrisandandreshow.com. It loads pretty fast. Pretty proud of that. Got all of our content up there. And it looks really good, except for that Peacemaker stuff. Chris, you want to say anything about that? No?
Yeah, all the Peacemaker stuff looks great. Because I put it together.
You can always follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Look us up at Chris and Andre. You can send us comments at comments@chrisandandreshow.com. And we really do. Even if we don't have a lot of people listening to us, I love talking to my brother right here every week.
Oh, yeah.
Gives me a chance to decompress. And I love you, bro. I miss you. It's all good. I went to a funny thing. I forgot to talk about this. I went to two funny things before we wrap up. Right. Or three. Went to my niece's birthday on Sunday in a town that's 30 minutes away. And my brother and his wife are doing the stupidest thing ever. So they have a daughter that is 3, and my niece just turned 2. And they give, it was my youngest niece's birthday. And they're giving them both presents on the youngest birthday, which is weird. And I'm like, I am going to play this out because I'm going to start buying the dopest gifts just to see what happens. Because
I don't feel like that's setting everybody else up for success in the long run there. That sounds like a bad... Not what you're going to do, but just like giving gifts to people whose birthday it isn't. Like, no, it's not your...
How do you break that chain?
Yeah. I don't know. That's tough.
I'm so... Like, I told my brother and his wife, I'm like, yo, this is going to get really bad for you. None of them know what you're doing.
Yeah, you done messed up now. What was the other funny thing?
No, it was... Two more. My wife is watching We're All Dead, this Korean zombie flick on Netflix. Mm-hmm. Pretty insane. But we watched it in Spanish. So I wasn't tuned into every episode, yeah. But when I saw it, it was in Spanish, which was really like it was jarring for me. I'm like, yeah, this is totally in Spanish. They're all like South Korean. Great show. I'm not sure if I'm into the whole Korean like novella format. It's kind of weird for me, but it was actually a pretty good show outside of that. And the last thing, oh my gosh, Jesus. Last odd thing, and then something you're going to really enjoy. Okay. I watched Reacher on Amazon. Mm-hmm. Great show. If you haven't watched it, please check it out. I mean, it's a really good show. It's kind of there's some plot holes in it, but it was overall a good show. We binge watched a lot of it on Saturday.
Nice.
Then we finished up the rest of it yesterday. And then the final thing, I watched Peacemaker episode 6.
Yeah, I still have to finish that. I watched episode 5 Sunday night, I think.
The ending of the show
was great.
Made me actually gain a little bit of respect for James Gunn.
So who's vindicated now?
Yeah, I'll give you that one. I didn't want it to be left unsaid, but when I watched, I actually rewatched the ending twice because it was the show has been building to, and I said this before. Yeah. Like, I'm like he's doing something, and I'm just trying to hold on there. But the ending of episode 6, I was like, wow,
that's awesome.
Maybe that's his medium. Maybe it's not movies.
It could be.
Because I don't think he gets a shot to do what he's doing with this show.
You have a lot more time, right? You're building them out in 1 hour increments as opposed to a 2.5 hour finite. I mean, yeah, he's had 6 hours to tell this story versus the 2.5 that he told the Suicide Squad story in. Now, granted, right. I don't know that making the Suicide Squad into a TV show would have necessarily made it any better.
No.
But you're right in that maybe this is James Gunn's like preferred medium, and we can just let Taika Waititi direct all the rest of the Marvel films.
I'm probably against that, but I will
that's
say
getting added to our Who Sucks More at some point. I didn't even think about that one.
I'll tell you what, like James Gunn, like he actually, I was not expecting it. So when you watch episode 6, you got to let me know when you watch it. But I had to rewatch the end of the episode just because of that. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was beautiful. Like the way, and I'm not even, I'm not even kidding. I'm like, yo, that was dope.
See,
like, and I was now, come on, I was caught off guard. Like he was making the cake, and he was like, yo, let me put some ice on it. Let me put a candle on. I'm like, yo, that was dope.
Oh shit, is it somebody's birthday?
Yo, so I might have to. I won't recant a lot of the stuff on James Gunn. Yeah. I will say that I think that might be his playground. That's probably where he needs it. Like, that's where he just rocked it out. So
I'm willing to accept
Peacemaker. That. Yo, James Gunn just got the recovery, like life-saving move for me. He found a mushroom on the Mario game. Like. He's doing all types of magic on that joint. Carolina lost, and I'm still trying to figure that out. Maybe we'll talk about it next week.
Maybe.
But I think I'm done with professional sports. But anyway, as always, I'm Andre.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you next time.